Well, moving on to the next one, and the next one is a panel discussion. The topic is digital resilience, the ammo you need to secure your assets in a connected world. So we have 3 speakers for the same and 1 moderator. The first speaker we have is Mr. Sunil Mehta, Senior Vice President and Area Systems Director, Central Asia, J Walter Thompson. Professional experience planning over 3 decades, currently working as the Senior Vice President and Area Systems Director, Central Asia. Since 20 years, a round of applause as I welcome him on stage. In the meanwhile, can I have the chairs on stage, please? Our next speaker is Meheriar Patel. Did I pronounce it right? Yes? Yeah. Mr. Meheriar Patel is the Group Chief Information Officer at Jeena and Co. He's the consultant and advisor to the governing board. He drives digital technology and business strategies in Jeena and 14 associated companies for global landscape. A round of applause, ladies and gentlemen, for Mr. Meheriar Patel. Our next speaker is Mr. Prashanth Pereira. He is the VP and SBU Head, Emerging Businesses and Technologies. A round of applause for Mr. Prashanth Pereira, ladies and gentlemen. And our moderator, we do have some woman power in the auditorium. Ms. Ritu Marya, she is the Editor-in-Chief for Entrepreneur Media and Franchisee India Media Group Company of Franchisee India Holdings Limited. Can we have a round of applause, ladies and gentlemen, for Ritu Marya? Yes.
A very good afternoon to all of you. And I think with those really good, elaborate presentations that you've seen so far post-lunch, this session is probably we're going to try to take it on a more lighter note in terms of really understanding the challenges, the perils of ignoring cybersecurity. We are all either digital companies today or we are looking to become digital companies if we are more, I would say, SME traditional. But what we've probably not realized so far is that there is a different kind of war that is starting out there. And this war will be fought on screens. It will not be fought with weapons. And the more screens you have, the bigger the war. So, you know, I have a super panel here today, and they have expertise of understanding cyber intelligence, cyber risks that we run as digital citizens in terms of how do we need to protect our companies. And while, you know, cybersecurity, though we regard it as important, but nevertheless I've realized that most of the companies actually put it on a back burner. It is something for another time discussion. Right now there is discussion of sales, marketing, finance, growth to be done. So cybersecurity probably comes in the last, but I have a few slides to show you, and probably the numbers that you will see will baffle you. I mean, I don't know how much you follow the kind of cyber risks that are going along over there. But I think in 2015 alone, about 154 sites of the government were hacked. Can I have the presentation on? Yeah, 164 government sites were hacked. So 3.5 million is the kind of cybersecurity positions that need to be filled up if the cybersecurity in the world has to actually be maintained, which is really a big number. I mean, and it's not just an Indian problem, it's a global problem, and the world needs to fix this problem. So less than 5% of the company's entire spend is actually done on IT, in which probably cybersecurity, within IT, cybersecurity probably receives about 1 to 1.5%, which, as my panel will tell you, is far less than what it is supposed to be. 500,000 are the kind of cybersecurity professionals that were required by 2018. Now it's even far higher. In 2017 alone, about 3.5 million records were hacked in India. So you can imagine what kind of risk are we sitting at. I mean, so if you look at the number of people being added versus the rate at which cyber crimes are being increased, it's far bigger. So we really need to fix this problem if at all we need to see ourselves safe in the digital space. Now, coming to my next slide, some of the industries are more vulnerable to risks in the cyberspace than others. These industries being technology, of course, being a technology area, financial services, big risk, real estate, construction, and hospitality. If we followed the Marriott hack right now, about 1 million records of customers were hacked. Again, a huge risk. Retail industry is at a huge risk, which means you need to have your credit card safe at all points of time. E-commerce with it. Government. All records are with the government, and the espionage in government records is perhaps the highest. And automotive industry, which still continues to carry a huge risk because you pay your EMIs, you pay your taxes. Nobody buys a car or automobile today outright. So, you have all your records out there. So, I have a distinguished panel here today, and I'm going to ask them this, and I'm going to start with you, Prashanth. You understand at Manipal Technologies, you understand how, the risks that particularly cyber crimes exist in the BFSI space. And we know that financial services is running a huge risk. It's one of the most vulnerable industries. What risks do you really see, and how do you think is the way forward to fix them? Is it preventive? Is it curative? How would you suggest it?
Well, in the financial industry, as you know, it is one of the key factors that people want to attack, or the hackers want to touch base, because that's where you make a lot of money, okay? Whereas the banks and financial institutions do their best, in terms of protecting their data and prevention from cyber hacking, and ransomware attacks and everything. But it is basically, you can do a preventive. Plus, what happens is you can think of potential future hacks that happen. But the third thing is there is always the fear of the unknown. Okay? However much you are prepared, there is somebody or somewhere or a team of people trying to get to you. Okay? And this all starts in a very small manner also, and in a large manner also. And now lately there is this data protection. We hold in financial services a lot of client personal data, which people want to access badly, because with that you can do a lot of financial transactions, go through people's accounts, siphon off money from their accounts. There are a lot of things that can happen. And interestingly, if I can quote an example, I was just having a chat with the CEO of a large financial services firm, okay? And I asked him, where is your attendance or your biometric to your access stored? Okay? And he told me it is in the PC of the receptionist. So you can and after he answered it, he realized what he had just said, and then he mentioned, oh God, okay? So I said, that's exactly, you take data for granted, okay? Or some security feature saying, okay, it's just an attendance system. But if the receptionist wants to use that data because she's disgruntled, so she can give the entire employee database with the name, ID, and biometric. And considering Aadhaar has your biometric for financial transactions, what would the impact be? Yeah. Okay. So therefore, there are preventive measures like we are coming out with virtualization. Okay. So it protects the identity by masking it with a dynamic number. Okay. We also plan under Manipal to get HackerView, which is the world's leading cybersecurity firm and training center, into India, so that we, since the shortfall you mentioned was 3.5 million, and incidentally, 50% of all IT personnel are Indians, but very few people, a negligible number of that come into cybersecurity.
So where there's a big business opportunity there too. So.
Yeah, there's a big business opportunity, definitely. So that's where we are trying to see how we can help, bring people up the curve to protect cybersecurity.
Sure. Sunil, let me come to you. You represent JWT and WPP, which is largely a media and a communications organization. What cyber threats do you sort of come across, either at a small level on daily basis or at a larger level on an organizational, global organizational basis? And, you've almost had a 20-year career, and what changes have you seen? What sort of what have you seen in terms of people becoming, or organizations, CEOs, the top management becoming far more mindful of the need of having better cybersecurity in the organizations?
So, if I go back traditionally 20 years plus back, media industry was typically known to be far behind or absolutely naive about technology in those days. So we graduated around that period, and the leaps and bounces were so fast because we didn't have a baggage. So therefore, the adoption of technology, one, adoption of security practices from there on. So we did our security policy in our company in early 2000 or late 99, 2000, I mean, just end of the century, last century, literally. And people are surprised how a media company is writing a security policy internally. So the awareness of writing a security policy, doing a complete hack into the systems by professionals in those days was never heard of by anybody in those days. Okay, so we were well prepared mentally, thinking proactively, and this was a support directly from the top man who was the CEO of the company, who felt at that point of time this is very crucial and important. And how does he know that it's very crucial and important? It's how the C-level people, whether it's a CIO, no CISOs in those days, therefore how the CIO presents threats to the company and makes them aware of what they are not aware, and how you convince your management that you need to invest in preventive measures, security practices, culture change completely from there on. And in those days, it was not as polished as it is currently 20 years later. So the change has been, we were working in silos in terms of security. There was a small security policy here, there was one tool sitting here, there was a third tool sitting somewhere else. All were doing their work in bits and pieces. Over a period of 20 years, what everybody has seen is an integration of all that. Interlocking of all those practices, interlocking of tools, and interlocking of procedures, and interlocking of understanding. Education has played a great role in our company, and we do that very, very consistently, making sure that people understand right from the entry-level process what security is all about. The moment you make them sensitive, it automatically drills into their mindset that this is their DNA. It no longer becomes a new thing for them. And because we started much earlier, almost 18, 20 years back, it was very easy when SOX came into existence globally, because we were a listed company there and we had to follow compliances as per SOX principles. So we were already way ahead into complying a lot of stuff. So it became very easy for us to be SOX compliant. We became one of the earliest SOX compliant media companies in the world out of India. Okay, and then we went one step further. We started practicing or implementing compliances based on ISO principles as well. So ISO 27001, no other media company in the world was talking about those days. We started doing all that because we felt if we bring in these compliance and procedures, people understand security internally, because internally processes all change, right from an HR person knowing where to keep the files on the table or locked in the table or under a drawer or inside a drawer or being open or writing on a piece of paper and plonking it there openly. Everything changed. So therefore, I think education played a great role in our companies. We are very sensitive on client data because we sit on a lot of primary data. When an ad is released, for example, the business that we are in or any of the other practices that we have like research and PR and so on, once it is out in the market, it's secondary data, one is not worried. But whilst it is being created, that's the big worry, for example. And that's where good practices come into play, right up to putting films on windows so that somebody outside cannot peep in through even binoculars in those days and peep into your ads as to what. And we have experienced that actually. A competitor was actually in the next building, and they actually hacked into one of the ads, and we saw one of the ads getting released before our ad got released. And very important one early next morning. So we learned lessons from there on. So it is not just perimeter security, processes and everything. You have to look all around. You have to look into areas where you don't think normally that you should look into. And I think that plays a lot of proactive role by the C-level people or senior people, and you have to make them very sensitive and keep on drilling and focusing. And they have to understand that when you start doing that early stage, from an early stage, your investments and your risks and risk mitigations are all in place. So you are following a good preventive mechanism in place much earlier than worrying later when a disaster happens. We have been through disasters of different kinds where people have had to go live on BCP principles, and DR we'll talk about. But it started much early. So it all depends again on the culture of a company, how you have drilled, what are the people behind it. And we have seen support coming from the top man all the time, globally from a global chairman on what's the importance of security. So right investments at the right time, right principles of education, all have been in place for a very, very long time. And I think, therefore, it makes us comfortable to sleep properly. Otherwise, we would not be sleeping.
Sure.
Yeah.
I agree. So coming to you, Meheriar, you sort of have looked into the supply chain industry, and you guide and advise companies in that space of logistics to understand cybersecurity better. So and I mean, considering that logistics itself is becoming so specialized with blockchain and real-time tracking and GPS systems being in place, what are the real hacks that exist? As we move into the digital space, we also move into a space where delivery or, so while of course there are physical risks of the person who's delivering might actually be a terrorist, but nevertheless, even in the cyberspace, there is another set of problems that exist with your data, with your credit card details. What challenges do you see in this industry?
So I would like to jump into a situation where most of the organizations are adopting cloud platforms, and you have your infrastructure not necessarily in your own data centers, but in data centers which are hybrid, probably in a private or a public setup. I think security there is not being given that type of an importance and taken into as a foresight consideration that the service provider would automatically give you security as a granted point for any company. So I think when you go and adopt that type of an infrastructure, I think when you're doing a cloud adoption, I think security comes hand in hand of an implementation of your infrastructure as well, when you look at networking coming in. So I think the base part comes in there, that you give that service, part of the service in your infrastructure. So I think that's number one. Number two, when you go and say that you need to provide service to a third party, is something that we do as a logistics partner or a 3PL partner. We normally say that we host a lot of your data, we manage your products, we do a lot of warehousing activity for that company. So we need to be absolutely clear as to what type of technology we have implemented. So there are a lot of these vulnerabilities that we need to take care upfront and that we don't fail. So we have a lot of ISO 27001 situation as an ISMS that we do. We have these audits that frequently happen that we take care. So all said and done is today's world, we have a lot of e-commerce that happens online. And security is not stopping anyone to do e-commerce, right? Those number of sales are still happening. People know that there is vulnerability involved. So I think it's not a technology alone problem. I think let's keep that aside. Every organization has got some amount of security already there at a parametric data center level, at your endpoint level. So what can you do more? I think that is something that we need to gauge and work towards. So every industry has their own parameters of security levels that has to be implemented, and so has most of our industries done. So I think it's more of an awareness, knowledge sessions internally, and what is happening is speed is also an affected part, where everybody wants to do things immediately. I think there is a gestation period involved to take the next steps. So I think wait and watch, take advice, and take the next steps. Most of the points which are vulnerable today are those clicks which have happened from email, and that has generated a leakage of a value to you. So I think those are some of the points of mine.
Sure. Now I was recently for Entrepreneur Media, I was traveling to Europe and I happened to meet the CEO of Avast over there. Now he said very interesting, he told me something very interesting about cybersecurity. He said that, you know, we like to think that the hacker is probably, or the guy who's actually sort of spoiling your systems is this, you know, college guy who's sitting in who's bored at 3 a.m. in the morning and doesn't have anything better to do, and he just decides to hack into your system. But on the contrary, what he told me was quite eye-opening, and it may shock some of you, is that it's actually almost like a terrorism, organized terrorism of cybercrime that exists out there. So there it is transnational, it is hugely well-funded, and it is also sort of black economy-led. So if you don't understand that, you're actually fighting, if you're getting hacked, you're not really sort of fighting with a college kid. You're actually fighting with a very, very large organization that was only made for this purpose. You know, we understand terrorism, we understand Al-Qaeda's and all of that, but we probably still don't understand what's the Al-Qaeda of cybercrime. Right. But the fact is that there is a similar mafia that exists out there which is only up to this.
Correct.
Now, my point is that if that is the case, you know, large organizations may still have the muscle and the financial muscle and the manpower and human muscle to fight it out. How about SMEs? They would neither have the know-how, neither they would have the talent, neither would they have the monies to fight out such a big sort of attack coming on them. What is your suggestion to SMEs to be able to protect themselves from cyber attacks?
Well, see, basically with SMEs, because they are startups and they're small, they tend to use shortcuts, okay? Simple thing like a pirated software or pirated Excel, Microsoft, and, you know, they don't want to take the original licenses, you know, cut and, you know, wherever possible, you know, save money, etc. But this has a larger impact. They don't realize, they say, for now, let us run with this, okay? It is only the post-mortem when the attack actually happens that you try to, you know, fight it out or prevent it. But in a sense, you can't fight it out, even for large organizations, because if the attack happens and if it is successful, you lose the data, or you lose financial information, or you lose money. Simple case of Cosmos Bank, you know, where they found a flaw in the bin, okay? And they exploited the bin, but they did not take the money out of the cards of the people, but they took the money out of the bin. Okay? So if an attack takes place and it is successful, it is going to cause you loss. You cannot fight because you don't know where the hacker exists, because the money within seconds is transported across the world, withdrawn from different locations, and the money is gone.
Sure.
Okay? Only afterwards you can do something to say, okay, this was the kind of attack that happened, this was my vulnerability, and this is where I have to step in and block this and figure that out. So my thing would be that even if you are an SME and you're starting up as a startup, you need to save costs. Don't compromise on data security.
Sure.
Use the proper licenses, proper setups that are required. Invest a little bit of money, because once it hits you, it hits your reputation, then you lose business.
I think one more step you need to add is currently even the SMEs are pretty smart and they have understood that they need to buy license copies and so on. Because they're growing now, okay? It's not a two-man team or one-man team or three-people team, they're growing. So they start using, let's assume, the legal licenses and so on. But what happens then after? Once they have bought licenses, they do not have the culture of upgrading or patching them regularly, okay? That there are patches coming up from the top companies in the world, whether it's an operating system or it's a software, there are patches, updates, upgrades coming all the time on a daily basis, literally. Unless and until, again, you have deployed those tools to push in those patches to apply, they will not realize that they have not applied patches for many, many days or months, and they have actually made their systems vulnerable by default,
sure,
even though they have bought original licenses, for example. Therefore, unless and until you deploy those tools as well, one more area to block an attack is one of those. Because typically, if you see the old PCs, like an XP, no longer has anybody producing even patches for that. So it's a completely transparent to hacking completely. Or a Windows 7 version, which is pre 7.1, for example, is all vulnerable to to attacks. So if people are not educated all the time, or they do not deploy tools, if they are on that good path, and the SMEs should also understand that this is a great point for them to sell their companies and their products when they go out and talk to people saying, we are completely compliant, we buy legal softwares, we update them, upgrade them, patch them regularly, we do not use illegal copies or any such thing. It brings them more business in any case by a selling point. Second, if they start looking at even going compliant with ISO 27001, for example, those kind of things, track these kind of things and make them aware of what needs to be done all the time. So I think, and that doesn't cost money. That doesn't cost enough or rather too much of money. But if done initially, it saves them a lot of heartburn, a lot of problems later, and a lot of time is saved. It doesn't cause business disruption or reputation risks for them and their clients as well. Because if they are using clients' data, and if their systems are vulnerable, they're also putting the client's data to risk. So not only themselves, even the client's data at risk. Yeah. So it's a two-edged sword if they do not follow compliance principles. So I think that's very important and critical that from the beginning, once they're set up, they should get this as a culture to adopt from day one and not wait till the company becomes 100 crores, now I can afford, now I can do this or that. I think that's a wrong way to do it.
Sure. Let me come to you, Meheriar, and let me ask.
I have one point on this, okay. is basically the SMEs don't have money to spend on IT.
Right. Correct.
Very clear. I don't have money, I can't spend. That's it, plain simple. What can IT startups do for these SMEs is very, very important. In this today's age of RPA and AI, can something be done on security, as plain and simple? If your manpower can be replaced by AI security, AI-based security, that can make a difference. So we're looking at working with a lot of startups, especially on the RPA and AI and OCR-based technology. So there is a great amount of work happening there. But I think there has to be some amount of concentration on security for the digital part. And I think that would be a great gainer for the IT startups.
Sure. So I'm going to come to the last leg of this discussion. Now today, I have seen a change in sort of ransomware demands that are made. Earlier, there used to be mails which were pleased that somebody had passed away and, they needed money to release the monies. And, it was more like a plea mail that came to you. But now they're like almost as good as blackmail mails. I have these videos, I have these pictures, I'm going to put them up everywhere. You give me these monies. Now, on a simple level, how do you sort of see that? Is this a real mail or is it just a spam? How do you tell?
So I think the board level discussions happen as a story with the hackers itself. So everything is a story in today's world. Everything has got a background and working towards. So, and role plays are very, very important. As I said, it's not only an IT problem. The role plays not necessarily are an IT role that the hackers plays.
Sure.
So I think that particular whole part is very well organized, worked on, and then the hack happens. Because the tune of hacking is not in few crores, but hundreds of crores.
Correct.
So I think one has to understand that when the hackers have to reach that type of money to extort, then the work of the background also takes that much amount of period of time.
So it's organized
crime. So it's completely organized, well thought of, perfectly casted situation, which I think it's difficult to, stop. But there are some few do's and don'ts which are very, very important for corporates and SMEs, which protects you from those things. And I see that especially when you are giving leeway to sanction of money, those have to be checked, rechecked, and it has to be like if you have an authentication of a payment, you have 2 levels.
Right.
So those are some of the things that you yourself have to do.
Correct. Any other?
So nowadays, you get very fancy mails, as you rightly said, and they are targeted to the C-level people only. Most of the time, 99.999% CEOs and CFOs only, because if it is on behalf of the CEO to CFO, the CFO normally complies because it's the CEO's request for money or authentication or an approval of money by saying just approve by clicking on this link. That's about it. So unless and until again, here the education plays a great role, because every day there is a new type of an email or a communication coming in. Earlier, of course, we catch spam. We know how to catch such malicious mails as well. But as they say, the criminals are always 2 steps ahead, and they are always inventing newer ways of even communications. Earlier, one would catch them on grammatical errors and make out that this is all nonsense and just ignore. Now the grammar has also improved. They are very polished. They are far more educated in where they lacked. They have realized their mistakes. Yeah. They are polishing their mails so that they become convincing. But if you again read the context, as Prashanth also mentioned or Meheriar mentioned, everybody's in a hurry to approve. Oh, CEO wants some money. Let me say yes and send it to my accounts department. Please release this money. But release the money to whom? So there is always a catch easily. It can be found out very easily. But the trick is, if there is something embedded in the mail in form of a click, which takes you to a malicious site, whereby your intranet or internet-related stuff gets compromised, that's a big risk more than the money going away. Because it's not actually, the money will never go away. It's actually getting into your system through an embedded thing or some line which makes you click or makes you say yes, no, or something. So I think education all the time plays the most. Absolutely. I completely agree with you.
One more point here I would like to highlight is that whenever, as individuals or small SMEs with 1 to 5, 10 people, when you receive these kind of mails, my request is please do not respond, because the moment you reply also, it triggers an action. Okay. Generally, people play on the fears of people, and when you receive a mail, you start wondering, which year, what did I commit that, that has been recorded and sent. Let me just check whether it is true or no or something. Being fairly decent kind of people, you should always, ignore it. If you're a company and you have an IT team, send those kind of mails to them and say, just please check, okay? Rather than respond or be inquisitive to check whether there is really something or no, because any of your action that you do initiates a
So a reply triggers it, a forward doesn't.
Yeah.
I think education, ultimately, I'll tell you, how you make people aware, educate them with examples actually of what is going wrong all the time at boardroom levels, across teams, right from even through HR people and so on, makes a big difference. As we were talking informally, even your smart TVs can capture a lot of your activities in your bedroom, and you will never be aware of what's going out and how you're getting blackmailed or into a ransomware attack kind of a situation. So I think it starts from home, from your own practices. You have your cameras on top of your laptops. You can keep them covered, or a flap. All these simple things, simple techniques, can help you save a situation which can get into a very bad issue. And nowadays, one has to be very careful. Teens getting exploited, and SME or corporate, doesn't matter. All our lives are dependent on these kind of things. And one thing can lead to another, and it can backtrack into your company as well. So because you're using your mail traffic and so on, all these ransomwares come directly linked there. So one has to be really, really careful.
Sure. So these are actually some of the main nature of cyber crimes that you will come across. Malware being 61% the highest, and phishing mails, of course, exist. Exploiting vulnerabilities and cyber espionage. So what do you think we need to be most mindful about at this stage?
I think phishing currently is the biggest one, which is the big worrisome, because cyber espionage or malware are known that these are happening in some form or the other. Phishing is something whereby it's like getting entry into your system. So I think that's where prevention has to be played very strongly. I think that is the first entry barrier that you need to create, and then comes espionage and all later. And everybody knows that the biggest risks are internal. So cyber espionage is not somebody sitting outside, as you said, somebody with a mask or face at 3 in the morning only coming and attacking you. It's your internal people. So you need to be careful, because they are your biggest threats. It will always be your biggest threats due to various reasons, disgruntlement or various 20,000 reasons could be. So one has to deploy some kind of security measures internally as well, because everybody keeps talking about internal threats, but what do you do about it? So that's the question. How do you again educate, keep your eyes open, keep your ears open, look out for lifestyle changes or behavioral changes in people, or asking for passwords regularly, or speaking, or just all the time near the HR people wanting to know about the payrolls, etc., of senior people. I mean, there are so many things which happen. So I think one needs to be alert all the time.
One point which I wanted to mention is that the mobile part of security is the most not looked at part today, and not even covered in the security parameters, especially when you have company policy, very few players saying that I want to give security as a demarcation point between personal and corporate. So that particular vulnerability on a mobile, especially on the Android device, has to have some security which protects your complete operating system. And if you see that apps that you download have these vulnerabilities or accessibility, which you have to provide, rather than granting access and then repenting about it. And especially on the malware part, which are saying is some malware which comes into your system and lays silently dormant unless and until activated by the hacker. And if you don't identify that, it creates a problem after some time.
So it's better to delete it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Any suspicious stuff, out.
Great. So thank you very much for that, gentlemen. I've been shown a timeout. I think this was a meaningful discussion, considering that we are just sort of in the threshold of finding ourselves a victim of cyber crimes. And it's just that your own mindfulness, your own awareness about what crimes could actually save your company and your systems to not get destroyed. So thank you very much for your patience listening. Thank you, gentlemen. Wonderful discussing this with you.
Thank you so much. Well, we definitely do not want to interrupt you all because the panel discussion was very, very nice. Well, you all have to stay back, please. So I would request Mr. Vinod VC, Managing Director, CSAM, NASSCOM SME Council Chair, Kerala, to come on stage to felicitate Mr. Sunil Mehta. Thank you so much, sir, for giving us your valuable time. Next, I would request you to felicitate Mr. Meheriar Patel. Thank you so much. Well, it seems you have a great fan following. The moment you took that memento, everybody started applauding for him. Next is Mr. Prashanth Pereira. No, let's not get into this. Nobody bribed me for that, sir. And next, our moderator, Ms. Ritu, Marya. Now, ladies and gentlemen, a better fan of applause for all our speakers and our moderator on stage. Thank you, thank you. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, sir.